Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast, where every other week we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Now, here are your hosts, Sharmane Adams and Chez Filippini.
Welcome. A quick reminder to listen to Bishop Walk's last episode where he spoke about the mystery of the liturgy of the church. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Father Paul White. He is from St. Peter Catholic Church in Mary Esther, Florida. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's good to see y'all.
Good to see you too, Father Paul. Welcome. Here at the Gaudium et Spes podcast, we'd like to kick off the show with the first line from this great document from Vatican II, which goes, "The joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ." So we like to play a little kind of highs and lows. What are your joys and hopes lately, your griefs and anxieties, where you're at in life?
Yeah, well, you sent me that, and I've been thinking about it, and most of it is around the coronavirus event, for the past couple of years. But I want to back up just a bit to put that in the context of how I dealt with that. There's this wonderful phrase in the Easter Vigil, the Exultet, the hymn to the candle, that says, "O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam." And that always struck me as strange. It's like, if it wasn't for Adam's sin, then the second person of the Trinity would never taken on human flesh, and we would not have this better relationship. And that seems to be the way God works. No matter what comes, there are good things that can come from it. And that's got to be a guiding light for me. And I saw that as bad as the coronavirus was, that doesn't mean that the deaths and the hurts was bad or was good. But I saw immediately there could be some good things for the church coming from this. And not knowing how long it was going to last, but I thought it was providential that the letter from the bishop came out on March 18th. St. Joseph's Solemnity was the next day, and then the last Mass was on Friday. St. Joseph was a man whose life was turned upside down and changed and couldn't make any plans over and over again, and this is what coronavirus started out with us. But he stayed faithful. And I wrote the parish about that first week, and the second week I came across a thing called Eucharistic fast, which doesn't happen often in the church, but I saw, Father Hugh at the Abbey used to say, what we do daily, we do dully. And now that we don't have it, to see a thirst for the Eucharist grow again, a thirst for Mass to grow again, the community, and I think that occurred. So that's what I was hoping and praying would happen. Probably the greatest joy was when we first came back together, and the sound in the church, after having been just recording by me and 2 or 3 other people, the singing was incredible. It was almost bringing you to tears that we were starting back up again.
I agree. I just was so joyful to see that again, so much so that I was brought to tears just to experience the Eucharist in this with community of our family, our church family.
I do remember the last Mass being that feast day, and it was a bleak. I went to Sacred Heart. It was a daily Mass. It was a bleak feeling, but at the same time, it was almost like, well, what better way to go out in terms of like the fatherly care of St. Joseph? And just like you said, like Jesus had to entrust his little tiny life into St. Joseph's hands in that exile to Egypt, and we were kind of going to a similar thing, and he came out the other side, and we've pretty much come out the other side for all intents and purposes. So no, you're right. It was a very poignant moment for sure.
There was another statement that came to my mind that, in fact, Bishop Ricard mentioned it to me one time of Pope John the 23rd. Supposedly, before he went to bed tonight, he used to say, "Well, Lord, it's your church. I'm going to bed." And it's a marvelous stance to take, that we don't have to do everything, but just to entrust ourselves to the Lord and do the best we can in the situations. And I think that's what we've been trying to do.
It's a good reminder also seeking the joy even in the bad.
Sure. Yeah.
Sharmane, what's up with you?
Well, my joy this week is that we are leaving tomorrow to celebrate my mom's birthday, and it's a big one, but she wouldn't want me to tell anyone how old she is. My kids are coming in town, get to be with my mom and my dad and my brother, and so just looking forward to that time. The low this week, I guess within the last week and a half is Hurricane Ida. I've a lot of friends. I even have family that live in the affected areas, and just speaking with them at night about, their trials and tribulations, and just trying to rebuild. And just for us, we can relate to that. So, we, as our diocese, have had many hurricanes. We have built back, and just giving them encouraging words. And, so what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to copy. Honestly, the Ida, watching that, just the curse of living on the Gulf Coast, where you pray for protection, but yet because it's the Gulf, some other brother or sister on our coast is probably going to get hit, and just feeling helpless in a way in terms of what they're going through, and we can donate and we can go over and work and lend our time and stuff, but just we know in this diocese what the long haul looks like, and just knowing that that's ahead of those folks is certainly weighing. Joys though, little boy soccer. My son John Paul, he starts up practice. I'm coaching his team, and it's always just a complete delight to be out there with the 5 and 6 year olds running around, and they don't know what right or left or up or down is or anything, but they give it their all. And he scored some goals last year. And those were you want to keep a lid on the fatherly pride, but it's hard to when those happen. So looking forward to those moments again as the season starts.
So fun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Brings back such good memories with my kids. Yeah. My daughter was actually the only girl on the soccer team when she was 5.
Was she throwing elbows and just holding her own out there and stuff?
She was. That was super fun.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, Father Paul, we've had Father Michael Hartley on the podcast already, and also the Zelinskys, and we'd love to share just kind of where we've been as Christians, our upbringing, and then kind of the meat and potatoes of your life as a priest, and as we're going to get into also in the monastery, and just kind of your current outlook. So can you tell us just where are you from?
I was born and raised in Tallahassee.
All right.
When it was only about 50,000, and that was when the legislature was in season and the schools were back.
Right.
Then it dropped about half. But I went to Blessed Sacrament School and church. That was my parish. My mother was an Irish Catholic, and my dad was not Catholic, but he supported us in the church. And so we went to Blessed Sacrament and went to Augusta Raw and then to Leon High School. I was an altar server since I can remember, as soon as we could, and I enjoyed that. And looking back too, I feel very blessed that I was with the missal prior to Vatican II, the Pius V missal that was redone many times, and John the 23rd and Paul the VI. And so I've got a vision of both sides of that major event, which is really kind of nice to have. But I went back and forth between thinking about medicine and priesthood. My dad's a pharmacist. My grandfather was a pharmacist. My aunt was head of anesthesia at Tallahassee Memorial for a while. My mother's a nurse, so I was in the medical field. When I was on the medical side, when I was graduating from high school, so I had registered and been accepted at University of Florida for med school. That's what I was going to do.
A Tallahassee boy.
Going to Florida.
Of course, back that time, all the males were from Florida because of the lawyers and everything else. We didn't have the medical school or the law school at that time.
Right. Florida State, it was an all-girls school at its inception.
Yeah, FSCW.
I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I did, yeah.
I'm sure you knew that.
It's been thrown in my face by a few male Gator fans here and there.
I had an older sister and 3 brothers, so we did our duty to get her most of the time about that. But it was fun. But that's where I was going to go. And but I thought about priesthood too, but I never talked to anybody about it. And that I found out later was not good. And I found out, I know you were going to ask more in terms of this. I'd like to move into that. I found out my senior year in high school, toward the end, we had a priest from Conception Abbey in northwest Missouri who was studying at Florida State, working on a degree in rhetoric. A really nice guy. I really liked him. And I got to know him because I was still altar serving. In fact, I was altar server at one of my parishioners' weddings.
Oh, my
goodness. So now I'm her pastor. I won't tell you how old she is. But
oh, wow.
But that was kind of shocking to think that. Mm-hmm. But he invited me out for a vocation weekend for the monastery. And just after graduation and all the hectic stuff with that, And I've been out of state once before, and I thought this would be nice just to go off and see. And I'd never seen a monastery, you know. So I got my family said fine. My parents said fine. So I went out there, and I was there for 2 weeks because Father Aylward was gone the first week. And I fell in love with the place. It's out in the hills of northwest Missouri, way out in the sticks. It's very quiet. We had almost 1,000 acres. And I think part of the quiet and the solitude and the prayer and the calm was so good after graduation that I really kind of fell in love with it. And I was talking with a priest there who called me in and asked me what I was thinking about. And I told him, and that's the first time I talked about priesthood, because I was going to go to medical school. And at the end of my senior year, if I didn't think that that's what I wanted, I was going to try out the priesthood. But he suggested I try first the seminary. For 2 years, I could decide whether it was for me or not, and my credits would transfer. And then if I left to go to medical school, I could go straight through without a break. I thought, well, I'm glad I talked to you because that's a much better plan. So that's what I did. And I went the first year studying for the Abbey, thinking I was going to join the Abbey. And then I think most seminarians that go to a Benedictine place think about joining the Abbey, but pretty soon most of them decide. We used to call it the Hatch. We didn't want to go into the Hatch. So I switched at the end of my freshman year, and Bishop Tanner was Bishop of St. Augustine, where Tallahassee was, accepted me as a seminarian. But they left me going there. And then at the end of my junior year, I decided, no, I really did want to go in the monastery. So I switched back again, and he released me from the diocese and entered in 73.
You were fairly young.
Right out of college.
Right. And from the experience that I've seen, a lot of the guys entering a monastery are older. Is that the case with your monastery?
Well, back then it wasn't. It tended, we tended, in fact, we were not accused, but some of the bishops were saying, you're stealing our seminarians, they're joining the community. You know? So we backed up. We said, you've got to take a few years out, before you come back home. But there is a tendency, particularly after wars that we've been in, that there's an influx into the religious life.
Interesting.
But most of them were younger. But we do have older that come in. It kind of fluctuates at the time.
Okay.
So.
And this would have been right at the end of Vietnam, is the war you're referencing.
1973.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Or World War II.
Okay.
World War I. That's kind of a tendency that there would shoot up.
Huh.
So I entered the monastery as a novice the first year. And there was another event. One of the things you were asking about, kind of an experience of God, as I look back, I think it was significant for me. And even at the time, when I was a novice, the rule says, the novice stays there all the time. And basically, Kevin, you say, well, you eat, drink, and meditate. That's what you do in the novitiate, So my brother was getting married. My older brother was getting married in Dover, and I really wanted to go. And I asked the novice master if I could go, and I had it figured out I would miss one morning class on Saturday, be back Saturday night, and there for Sunday Mass, and so I really wouldn't miss anything. And he said, well, I think that's okay, but let me ask my associate, Father Jerome. And he called me back in and said, well, Jerome said, no, he thinks you should stay. That's where a novice belongs. And then he said, if you want, you can ask Abbot Kevin. I'm sure Abbot Kevin will let you go. But something said, no, this is where I belong. So I chose not to go.
To your brother's wedding?
To my brother's wedding.
Wow.
But that became kind of a watershed in my life to go back in terms of when things don't go my way or what I want.
Right.
And it's interesting because Father Jerome, who was the assistant novice director, later became abbot, was elected abbot, who, well, let me tell you, in the interim, as I continued in the monastery, a lot of the desire for priesthood was made up just by living the religious life. And so I really wasn't thinking about it until one day when he called me in his office. And I had a double major in behavioral science and philosophy. He said, well, we need a philosophy professor, and you've got a degree. And I thought, oh, my God, no, I don't want that. So after about the third time, he said, I want you to go into the priesthood because I see you teaching at the seminary. And that was the last thing in my mind. And we had a number of priests that were out from the monastery helping in parishes, and I didn't want to go out.
You didn't want the parish life.
I didn't want the parish life.
And why was that?
Because I was so happy with the community life.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that I didn't want it. It's one of the reasons I switched over was I didn't think I could survive by myself in a parish, because we had so many individual parishes, especially after the community. And I said, I don't want to be sent out. He said, well, you realize I'm bringing some people back home from the outside. I said, you realize you're not going to be abbot the rest of my life either. We had a good relationship.
Well, yeah, quite. Yeah. That was a lot of candor for.
Yeah. But I thought about it and decided that I'm being called by my abbot to do this, and so I accepted to do that.
Just to help for everyone listening right now, when we're talking about the terminology, we talk about abbey, we talk about a monastery, right? We're talking about the Benedictine Order.
Correct.
The oldest Western monastic order founded by Saint Benedict.
549.
Right. Yeah. So this is kind of, if you want to know monk life, the Benedictines pretty much, they invented it and have been the primary, standard bearers of it for the Western Church's history. I want to ask two questions real quick, backing up. You talked about falling in love with the solitude and the prayer and stuff. As a kid in Tallahassee, as a teenager, did you have like a prayer life that probably was building towards something deeper, or was it?
I don't think so. I mean, basically my prayer life consisted in going to Mass on Sunday.
Okay.
And there was an altar server. Sometimes I'd help out with benediction, and we had the miraculous medal novena. But I never really developed that much. I found it attractive, but I just didn't know what to do.
You were an altar server. Is there someone in life growing up that influenced your faith?
Well, it's very gradual. It was more just growing into it. I mean, there were some, like the pastor, where for a long time was Father Patrick Madden. He was Irish, but he was a very gentle, very sincere, holy man. I respected that quite a bit. But it was. I can't think of anyone specifically that I would look to and say this is the one that made me change. But
it was more internal.
It was more internal, but it was more looking back. Now I can see how I've been led and guided. It wasn't any abrupt change.
So this, as I listen to this, a person of my generation, the call to a monastic lifestyle would for me, it would seem like that's radical. Like you couldn't make that decision unless there was some kind of, knocking off the horse moment, and for you, you gradually grew into it, and then you got invited by somebody, and you were able to still make this leap into this alternative form of life.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about monasticism. But in high school, it wasn't until Aylward was there, and he wore the habit, and I thought, that's kind of cool. Many things can attract you to it. But that was my first exposure to it. And I guess in one sense, it was the tension there, because I had to let Florida know if I was going to be coming or not. And I had to apply to the seminary at Conception to know if I was going to be accepted or not. So there's a lot of tension around there. I really wanted to go there. Because I liked the first thing was the calmness and the attraction of the prayer life and things like that. I just really liked that.
You were drawn to that life.
Yeah.
And you spent 2 weeks there.
Yeah.
And during that 2 weeks, it's
when I decided
really transforming.
Plus, Father Roger, when he talked to me, said, "Come here first, and then you can decide later." And that just made so much sense. So it was also the medical side too. So they kind of came together in this. These two streams kind of came together there.
So Father, you're eventually, your abbot, aka essentially your bishop, or your asks you to consider priesthood. You get ordained, take final vows, right? Final vows.
No, I was in final vows already.
Okay, and so you're kind of fully in the life. What does fully in the life look like for you over those years? What was the experience?
They're ordained monks and they're non-ordained monks. It's not a stepping stone. And our motto is to work and pray, and that's basically what we did. So I was in various offices and things. I helped in the electric shop once. I helped as a guest master, assistant guest master, I taught in the seminary psychology class. I helped out in the business office. So wherever you got the assignments.
Okay.
So it didn't matter because sometimes you would be under this person and over here I would be his boss, So it was kind of nice to move back and forth in those kind of things because we knew situations change. And but it was a constant, steady life, of prayer throughout the day and being together, eating together and decorating together. And it was just a nice rhythm, It was, you didn't have to worry about what I'm going to have to eat tonight or where I'm going to go. Or there were sometimes those things, it would be nice to go out to a movie or something like that, but we were way out in the sticks. But we had shows at the Abbey too. But it was just a nice rhythm of life that I liked.
A lot of monasteries have specialties, like they, they make wine or they make a beer and they sell it into the communities. Did your monastery have a specialty? I mean, even raising cattle. I know of one in Oklahoma that
we had cattle out there. One time it was the leading one awards in the state, but as fewer monks were able to deal with that, we ended up getting rid of that. But we used to have milk from our own cows in the dining rooms and all. The main thing we had was teaching. We had a high school for a while, and then we had a college seminary and a theologate. So we had the 8 years leading to priesthood when I was there. Those are the 4. And that was the time when there was a huge drop-off, too. I started out with about 260-something in all 8 years. And when I was then the next year, the theologate dropped off and we decided we better close it. My junior year, we had 35 people in the seminary. And we were going to either close it if we didn't go up, and we went up to 50 in my senior year in the college.
Goodness.
And then it started going back up again. So that was a time when there was just a lot. I think it was post-Vatican II and ramifications from that. But it just was a nice lifestyle. But then, and for a while I was business manager. That was my last assignment, business manager. We started doing a lot of reconstruction and things like that. And so you learn a lot of jobs that you're not qualified for. But I did start going out as well, on weekends to help out in parishes. And I began to enjoy that. And it's hard to say what exactly led me, but eventually I started thinking about the possibility of coming back here, which usually you don't do. I made solemn vows, which are forever. But it took me a long time to make that decision, and I talked to the abbot about it, the abbot president of the local in the area. Anyway, I had to go all the way to Pope John Paul to be released from my vows if he approved that. And so there was a lot of thinking about it, praying about it. Is this the right decision? Am I running from something or am I running towards something? And that was the scary part, because one of the vows we make is stability of place is unique for Benedictines, which means basically I'm going to work out my salvation here with this group of people no matter what. And to say I need to leave is kind of saying, well, God, you can't help me here. I got to go do it myself. Wow. And that was the frightening part.
Goodness.
So it took a long time to discern, is this a call or is this running? And finally decided it was a call. And
how long did that take you to discern that was a call?
Really, I came down here in 95. That's when I asked for a period of exclustration, it's called, for the monastery, so I could think and pray about that. But I wasn't incarnated in this diocese until 2003.
Okay.
So it was a good while. And it takes a while for the process, too.
Sure.
But, and I had to find a bishop who would accept me because I was ordained. It's a neat term in the church. You can't be you have to have a head. You can't be headless priest. You have to have an ordinary. So.
Right.
Okay, so walk us through that. Once you got here, and totally new life. Even leaving your friends from the monastery behind and all that, was that difficult for you? How was that transition?
It was, in a way, because I was still in that process of discerning that. But the good thing, as I look back, is I brought all of that with me, my Benedictine heritage. I still consider myself a Benedictine. I brought all that with me. I was in Tallahassee the first year. Bishop Smith was here, and his first assignment was to Sacred Heart Hospital. I was a staff chaplain there for 3 years. Learned an incredible amount of stuff there.
Restoking the old medical attraction.
Yes, actually, earlier on in there, we had an infirmary, and I thought, well, maybe I could be the doctor.
Right.
But I said, no, don't go there.
Benedictine doctor.
I was afraid I'd get too hot about that, and I would not do what I'm supposed to do. So I was at Sacred Heart for 3 years, and then Bishop Ricard was here, and then he signed me to St. Paul here in Pensacola. I was there for about 1.5 years or 2 years, I think, and then to St. Mary for a couple of years, and then I was in St. Anne in Mariana and Chipley, St. Joseph in Chipley, and then finally that was when I became director of liturgy, and I was wanting to get closer. So I wouldn't have to drive so far to get in here. And Bishop Ricard says, no, I want you to stay there. And I tried 3 times to get over here. No, you got to stay there. Okay.
And at that point, you were in Mariana?
I was in Mariana.
Oh, my
Chipley.
goodness. Yeah. That's quite a drive.
But then another interesting, Father Joe Calipari was at St. Peter. And he called me one day and he said, I'm going to St. John's. He said, I think you should apply for this because I think you can take it further. And I thought, well, I've been struck out so far, but I'm going to try. So I went by Bishop Ricard's office when I was down here one time, and I said, Father Joe said I should apply for St. Peter. And he looked up, as he was his one. He said, well, you better get it in because I'm getting ready to make a decision. I thought, that's different. I haven't heard that from him before. So I got St. Peter. I'm into my 17th year there.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
That is incredible. Yeah. Congratulations. Stability.
In place.
Right.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Before we totally leave the monastery, just for folks who maybe just aren't acquainted, talked about that rhythm. What is a typical day in the monastery?
Well, we got up for prayer at 6 o'clock, matins.
Okay.
And then the night before, it was at 9:30, we had night silence. So we had night silence between that. 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:20, it was nice on Sundays, you got 20 minutes extra, 6:20. And then we had time for prayer, meditation, spiritual reading after that. And then we had lauds at 7:15, morning prayer. And then we had breakfast, and all that was in silence. Night silence didn't end until after breakfast. So it was a marvelous way to start a day with 2 hours of prayer and silence and eating. At first I felt like I was being rude, I felt we were talking as a novice, but I loved that silence.
Right.
And then we go to our job, whatever job we had been assigned. And then we had Mass at 11:45, lunch after that, went back to our job. And then we had what we call daytime prayer at 5:30. And then we had dinner at 6:15, and then Vespers at 7:15. So that was a day.
Do you miss it?
When I first came down here, I really did. In fact, I know when I got to St. Peter, a lot of my prayer life had dropped out because I was so used to the rhythm of doing it. It was hard. I hadn't inculcated it really deeply. And I struggled initially at St. Peter trying to get some kind of prayer life. And I even went and ordered the Magnificat to give me something. In fact, I asked Everett Gregory to send me the 4-volume set that we would sing of prayer to help get me back, which it did. But now, I get up at 4:30 in the morning. Somebody just told me the other day I was still a monk. 4:30 in the morning, and I've got a good hour of, I do morning prayer, and I would do matins, office readings and morning prayer, and then a rosary just sometime in front of the Blessed Sacrament, the chapel in my house. So it's close to 45 minutes to an hour every day that I do that, some spiritual reading, and then I go out for Mass and go for the rest of the day. So it's kind of the monastic schedule to start it up.
Right.
Again.
That's what I was thinking, that you still have that.
Yeah.
It's just, it looks just a little different.
Yeah. I had
You're
to
not
create
with the guys that are doing the same thing, praying with them. You're by yourself, but that's your time.
And see, that's with the full circle, because I started out thinking I couldn't take it by myself. I wouldn't survive. Right. And now I just love my hermitage back there.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Do you still keep in touch with any of those guys?
Some of them.
And they're like, we want to be in the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee.
I appreciate you so much. It like just saying I struggled to get into prayer life, because I think so many folks out there, just whether it's looking at clergy or other lay people they think is holier than them or something like that, they're like, I struggle, but everyone else seems to have their stuff together. And it's like, well, even for folks who had so much formation, been in a monastery and stuff, a prayer life is never guaranteed just by a sheer, you're in this state of life, or you hang out with these people, you go to this, therefore you're guaranteed a prayer life. That's not the case. You have to
create the time.
Right.
And that's what I tell everybody. That's what I had to do, because I really didn't have anything. I just let it all slip, but I knew I had to do something. That's when Bishop Ricard told me about what John the 23rd said. I told him sometimes I have trouble getting all the hours in, and he said, the year of church, yeah. But John the 23rd also supposedly did all of his prayer in the morning because he was too tired in the evening. And Bishop Ricard said, if it's good enough for a pope, it's good enough for you. So I started doing that kind of, but I moved away from just satisfying, the checkbox. But yeah, it was comforting to know that.
And I think even as a lay person, working for the church, there are times, even I know when I first started, my prayer time lacked. And I just felt like I'm in the desert. I just really feel like I'm in the desert. How can this be, though? Because, and I was in full-time ministry, being a speaker and for 11 years in the church. And then when I came here, I was like, what's happening? I don't understand. But you have to intentionally, God's not going to shake you and say, pray. You have to intentionally set that time aside and, read that Magnificat, read whatever you can to get back into it and draw closer to the Lord through those readings, through Scripture.
Yeah, and of course that's the last thing that Satan wants us to do, is to be in conversation with God. So it's not just all our fault. I mean, we're fighting something more than just inertia in ourselves.
Right.
And that's why I tell people you have to create that time. And there was another thing I experienced in the monastery, because sometimes I'd be down there, especially at Matins. We sang it on a single tone, so it was kind of hypnotic almost. It was a mantra thing. But sometimes I'd be there and it was like, where have I been the last 20 minutes? But I found over time that just having the Word of God course through me when I even wasn't paying attention to it was formative.
And as humans, we feel guilty. I was even reading Scripture this morning, and I kept thinking, oh, dear God, please, get my mind back into it. Because as I'm reading it, my mind drifted. But that's a good point. I mean, still...
say, this is where I am, God, and just don't... It's kind of like trying not to think about onions. If you do that, I got to get back to my prayer. It doesn't work.
Right.
I love the personal responsibility, even, as lay people, but even as the breviary is a commonality between the monastic life and the diocesan priesthood. You're obligated in both senses. But in the monastery, if you don't show up for matins, for lauds, somebody's going to knock on your door, right?
What happens? Have you ever been in trouble at the monastery?
Never. No, actually, different monasteries have different practices. The Mother House had a practice where the prior would come around and say, okay, now you don't need to get up this week, because as long as somebody's praying. But we were expected to come to the prior and tell him, that we were not there. We missed that. Just to be responsible. And sometimes you couldn't because of your job. It depends on what was going on. But, we would go and say, I slept in this morning or overslept. And there wasn't any punishment for it necessarily, but it was just that part of humility and recognizing what's going on in your life, and just make sure there's not something going on in your life that's going to be a problem. But, and actually the breviary came from the monastic institution.
Right.
They had a set of prayer, so.
Right. Certainly nowadays, Bishop is not giving you a call at the end of your day. Like, did you make sure you prayed?
No.
Your right.
Right. Are you up at 4:30?
Yes. Maybe I should call him. Maybe up before 4:30.
Right? Maybe so. He'd love that. I'm
So-
sure.
So 17 years at St. Peter and just kind of, a different life, same priesthood, same holy orders, the same sacramental attachment and stuff, but a different experience of it. I was, it's not like you're surrounded by families and children hunting you down and stuff like that, but it is a little more of an active lifestyle and participation in the wider community. Has it been a blessing? Has it been a challenge in some ways?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's a great community. I mean, I never thought I'd want to be in a place more than 3 years. I used to tell them, well, that's all the homilies that I have, so I have to move on to the next 3-year cycle. But,
You can recycle.
there are challenges in it, but I really enjoyed it. I mean, they haven't asked me to leave yet, so I think that's a good thing. It's just living the life. We had a good community, and it's the prayer life, and that's what I emphasize is the prayer aspect. And I have a great staff, so I'm not distracted by some other things that like they didn't teach us how to fix toilets in the priesthood, and seminary and things like that. But sometimes you have to do all of that as well. But so all of those things kind of came together that frees me up to focus more on the spiritual aspect, which is what I like, which should be the case. That's what the priest should be focusing on primarily.
Well, just listening to you within the last 30 or 45 minutes, it's clear how rooted you are in prayer and, getting up. And it started early. I mean, whenever you entered the monastery, and it seems like you still have that same routine that's kept you rooted all these years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's wonderful.
It is.
Definitely.
One of the final things we want to chat about that kind of builds off of where we were last episode with Bishop talking about the liturgy. You were a former director of liturgy for our diocese.
14 years.
Yeah. You don't have to give your manifesto or, on like your liturgical, but, you've had a lot. Today, the day we celebrate, we're recording this podcast is actually on the Feast of St. Gregory the Great, a Benedictine who has given so much of the liturgical tradition that we have from his own hand, Gregorian chant, right, and all these sorts of things. What's your affection for the liturgy? What's your, yeah.
Well, I think everything, I never had any courses in it as such, but I lived it at the Abbey from 73 to 95. I was there. And just that daily course. And we used to say we may not have, other abbeys write about it, but we live it, is what we used to say in jest. But even in the very early times, we had one priest that was toying with Mass in English in the 20s. There were things going on at that time. But it's so well done there, and to be able to experience the fullness of the liturgical year. And that's what I've tried to do at the parish, and some of them think, there he goes again, Advent or Lent, you can't do this. But I think they're beginning to understand it. But that's the first time I really experienced the fullness of the liturgical year and the beauty of the liturgical year. I think I have to say that in some ways I feel most authentic when I'm celebrating the Eucharist. I don't know how else to say that. So doing it well and doing it, it's not about me. Ask the deacon classes that I've taught. That's one of my famous talks. It's not about you. It's about him, and it's about his people. So it is very important, and I think it's so important for us to provide that service so that it's not about us and what little things we want to do differently and here and there, but what the church is asking us to do and what the people need to be fed. So yeah, it's important. It's really important.
Well, our diocese is certainly blessed to have you, and it has been quite a treat having you tell your story. And I never knew. I mean, who knew?
Yeah, what a unique perspective. And
Monk, priest.
I know. I mean, this is a unique story. We really appreciate coming in to share it. We have tons of stories like this amongst our priests and also our lay people as well. So it's just great to hear the wrinkles of how God just moves
Yeah.
and orchestrates and is faithful and brings people in through things and out of things stuff. Just, yeah, I love it. Does the heart good, does the soul good.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, be sure and join us at our next, let's see, in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Bishop Walk will be back teaching on the sacramental life of the church in his teaching series on the main parts of the catechism. So we hope to have you join us then. And thank you again, Father Paul. It's been a great pleasure having
Thanks.
you.
My pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit gaudiumetspes.net or go to ptdiocese.org and click on the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.